yesterday I put together a trampoline, and my youngest son, Clayton, who's 7, helped me put together the trampoline. Now, if you've ever worked with a 4, 5, 6, 7-year-old child, and you're doing a project together, you know how much help they bring to the situation. But he was eager, and there are times where my kids aren't so eager, and I still have them help me with things. One year, Clayton was helping me pull weeds out of the garden, and he pulled up half of my tomato plants. I don't know how that was possible. I was like, they're the only thing in cages. How did you? He's like, Dad, look at all these weeds. So I didn't let him eat salsa for like 3 straight years as punishment. It's like, no, your allotment of tomatoes went into the weed pile that you pulled up. Well, we're putting together the trampoline, and he's got different jobs that are given to him, and so he's running around doing the different jobs. So I'm putting the springs on, and of course I'm going kind of in a star pattern because you don't put all the springs on one side. You keep going back and forth. So I'm putting the springs on, and before you know it, we've run out of springs, and I got more spots. And I'm like, where'd these springs go? Well, he was trying to juggle the springs. He can't juggle anything. Why he's trying to juggle springs, I don't know. And so, then I helped him crawl on the ground to hopefully try to find those different springs that we had lost. Now, eventually, we got it put together. We had to take 2 breaks because it was hot outside, and he's union. You can't work for so many, minutes together. So we took 2 breaks in the midst of putting together this trampoline. But, to the victor goes the spoils, as they say. So he got to be the first one to jump on the trampoline. He was pretty excited about that. Now, there are different times in my life as a parent where I've had my kids come and help with different projects, not because I needed their help and not because it was going to be beneficial to me, quite the contrary. I knew that them helping me was going to be more of a burden, but they need to learn. They need to learn how to do things that aren't fun to them. They need to learn how to turn a wrench or how to work a socket set. They need to learn how to hold the flashlight in one spot and to stop looking at everything else on planet Earth. Like, no, I just need you right here. And you made it 7 seconds. I really appreciate that 7 seconds, but we've got like several minutes of you needing to hold the flashlight in one spot. They need to learn that stuff. But at no point have I ever said, man, I need to go try to fix whatever it is in my car and get YouTube out. But maybe I'll ask my 4-year-old what he thinks about how we should maybe go about this project. In fact, now Clayton was reading the instructions. Last night he's like, Dad, did you know that it says only one person can jump on this at a time? I'm like, don't worry about it. We're not going to listen to that. Don't worry about that. That's just something they put on there. It's fake news. Don't worry about it. But he's reading the directions. Well, at no point was I looking at him to say, now, okay, I'm doing this now. How do you think I should go about putting the safety net on? Which, by the way, a safety net? When you were a kid, if you had a trampoline, did you have a safety net? You know what your safety net was? The grass on the ground. But we're putting the safety net on. I didn't ask him, hey, how should we weave this string in to anchor this safety net down? Because he's 7, and that's not the conversation. It's like, I don't need him here. He needs to be here to learn how to do things, but I don't need him there to help with anything. Now, here's why I open with that illustration, because you've had kids or you've had your grandkids out helping you do something, and projects always go a lot differently when they are helping, but you recognize it's more for their benefit than it is yours. Well, in the same way, when we do things for God, when we do ministry, when we give our time, energy, money, whatever it is, and we help God, He does not need us to do anything for Him. He's God. If He wants something done, He doesn't even have to snap His fingers. He thinks of it being done, and it's done. God does not need us to do anything. But God chooses to bring us along in the process, and He chooses to give us talents and abilities and ministries and tasks and all these different things. God chooses to use us not because He needs us, but because we need to be a part of His kingdom and building something bigger than ourselves. And just like when you held the flashlight there for 8 seconds and then you were somewhere else, like we mess things up, we get it wrong, we don't do it right, and yet God is constantly teaching us things through us giving back to Him something of ourselves, whether that be our time, energy, or money. Now today, we're launching a 2-week series that we're calling First Fruits. It comes from a concept in the Old Testament when the Israelites would bring the first and the best of their crop, of their animals, whatever it was, and they would present those things to God. and they would give to God off of the top. They wouldn't get all their stuff and say, okay, we're going to use this for this. What do we have left over? Okay, that's God's. That's not the way that they would give first fruits. That would be last fruits. First fruits is, this is what we're going to give to God, and we're going to figure out what to do with everything else. So God gives us money. He gives us wealth. He blesses us in monetary ways, and what we are told in Scripture is that we are supposed to give off of the top a percentage of it back to Him. Not because God needs it, because He doesn't. He's God. He does not need for you to write a check for however many hundreds of thousands dollars. God laughs at the idea. It's like, you do know American money is not real. You're off the gold standard. It's just paper at this point with dead presidents on it. So God doesn't need that from us. But we need to be disciplined and to put Him first in every area of our lives, including our finances. Now, if you are new or you've been fairly new and you're like, oh, there they go again, the church, they're always talking about money. That's all they ever talk. You got your hand on your wallet and you're like, preacher, you're not telling me what I'm going to do with my money. I worked hard for that money and I budget my own money and I do with my own money. You probably do, and you're right. It is your money in that God has given it to you, but you need to understand that it is God who has blessed you with it all. Also, please note that this is the first sermon series that I'm doing on money in the 3.5 years that I've been here. So if you feel like he's already talking about money, you haven't been around for very long, because I do not, as a practice, talk about money, because in a way it's like everybody thinks we're always talking about money. But you need to understand that Jesus talks about money more than He talks about heaven and hell combined as topics. Jesus talks a lot about money. Do you know why? Because we think a lot about money. And money is a big part of the condition of our heart. And Jesus is like, if you're going to be that obsessed with money, we have got to figure out how to coach you to manage it, understand it, and see it in God's terms. And one more thing before we kind of jump into the material. A lot of times churches will talk about money when it's like, okay, we need money because we're going to do this project, or we're behind on things and we're going to have to make some real cuts. So we need you guys to start giving so these things, don't happen or have to happen or whatever. We, as a church, though, we're in a good place financially. We make it a habit of spending less than we actually take in. We do the opposite of the government, okay? We spend less than we get. And we've made that a habit. And so we're not like, oh no, what are we going to do? We're in dire straits. We need money. I guess I'm going to preach on money because we need money. That's not where we're at. We don't need your money as much as you need to give your money. And you're like, what does that even mean? That sounds like a cult type thing, like you're trying to do, verbal gymnastics. But the thing about it is that if God is not first an area of your life, and including this big area, it is going to mess up all these other areas as well. So we're going to talk about money, not because we're sweating about how we're going to pay for our bills, not because God needs your money, but because this needs to be the condition of our hearts. Okay? Now, as we talk about it, you think about the word tithe. People use the word tithe. Hey, we got to tithe to the church and bring our tithe to the church. The word tithe is a Hebrew word that means 10%. It's used like 40 times in the Old Testament. It's used about half a dozen times in the New as well. And it's a word that just simply means 10%. Like if you say, hey, what quarter is the game in? Quarter means 25%. It's like there's words that sometimes we use that have percentages attached that you don't think of the percentage, you just think of the word. So tithe means 10%. All throughout the Old Testament, the Israelites were called to bring 10% of what they had been blessed with, either by crops or animals or whatever it is, to bring 10% and give that and dedicate that to the Lord. But what we find in today's world is that of the people that attend church in America regularly, and regularly is defined as twice a month, by the way. I would say that's semi-regularly, but twice a month you're considered a regular church attender. 10% of those people actually tithe or give 10%. And so what we see is that we are behind the curve when it comes to the baseline level of giving as it's described in Scripture. In fact, in the New Testament, Jesus talks about tithing and giving, and then the Apostle Paul does as well. In 2 Corinthians 8, we're going to talk about both of those. We're going to begin in Matthew 23. So if you got your Bible, go ahead and turn to Matthew 23 real quick. And what we have is Jesus, this entire section, he's yelling at the Pharisees because the Pharisees deserve to be yelled at a lot. And he gives 7 kind of points of contention against them. They're called the 7 woes. And Jesus is yelling, hey, you're doing this, and you're not doing this right, and you're not doing this right. And then he gets to this topic of like the tithe and kind of bigger, more foundational concepts in the Christian or Jewish life. And here's what he says about it all. He says, woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you are hypocrites. You're two-faced. You pretend that you're one way in the public eye, but privately you're completely different. So you're hypocrites. You give 1/10 of your spices, your mint, your dill, and your cumin, but you have neglected the more important matters of the law, things like justice, mercy, and faithfulness. So what he's saying is, you guys are so legalistic and so focused on following the law to the nth degree that when you go to your little herbal basket outside your kitchen and you're going to make your hot tea in the morning and you're pulling those mint leaves off of there to put in your tea, you always make sure that every 10th leaf or the first of 10 leaves that you set aside for your tithe. You're so diligent about tithing, even like the mints and the dill, all that stuff. You go to your herbs and your spices, you even tithe off that stuff. And yet, things like justice, mercy, and faithfulness you neglect. Well, here's the reason why they did. Because it's easy to determine if you tithe or not. It's arithmetic. This is how much I have. Did I give 10% of that? If the answer is yes, you've tithed. If the answer is no, you've not. You've not tithed. So they were able to say, okay, if I've got 30, mint leaves on this tree that are ready to be picked off, 3 of those are going to be my tithe, and that's 10%, and that's easy to do. So it was really easy to check that box off. Justice, mercy, and faithfulness, there weren't exactly laws that pertain to, hey, this is how you are merciful in every area of your life. It was a condition of your heart. You can't really measure that. Like, hey, do you have faithfulness in your life? Oh yeah, I always keep it in my back pocket. Here it is, there's faithfulness. No, it's ambiguous. It's not a concrete thing that you can just have. Here it is. Did you tithe? Yeah. Here's my bank account. Here's what I gave to the church. Here's what I had for income. I tithed. But faithfulness, justice, mercy, those are ambiguous. So they were neglecting the more important matters of the Jewish life and by extension the Christian life, the godly life, and they were being legalistic by making sure they tithed even on their herbs and spices. But here's what Jesus says about that. He says, okay, this is how you're doing things. You should have practiced the latter, the big things, justice, mercy, without neglecting the former. He's like, yeah, you should be tithing. I'm not saying you shouldn't be tithing. I'm saying don't pat yourself on the back because you're tithing, because that's easy. You also need to be doing the bigger, more important things. And then he says, you guys are blind guides. You strain out a gnat, but you swallow a camel. Just imagine that picture for a second. You've got a gnat in that hot tea that you just put the mint leaves in, okay? And I go, I can't drink this. Get a new cup. And then your neighbor's got that same type of mug. Maybe it's one of those Woodlawn Christian mugs, like one of those big 16-ounce mugs. And there's a camel sitting there. Of course, he's spitting on everybody because that's what camels do. They're just terrible. Like, who wants to go see the camels at the petting zoo? They spit on you. They try to bite you. They're evil creatures. So you've got this camel sitting there in the mug, and you're like, oh, how was your day? Trying to get to the... It's this ridiculous word picture. Jesus is like, okay, you're taking out the gnat, which is unclean, you can't drink. But the camel, you also can't drink the coffee with the camel. You're neglecting the important things like the camel. You're making sure the gnat's out of there. You shouldn't be having anything in your cup of coffee in the mornings, though. You should be tithing. You should be doing the important things, but you only focus on tithing because it's the easy thing. Well, think about how that then applies and comes into our world and how we think of that. Because Jesus is almost assuming, like, yeah, you tithe, that's easy. Well, once again, like 10% of regular church attenders are actually tithing. So it was easy in their context. It was kind of an understood thing. They were all doing it. But then you come into ours, and we have tricked ourselves into thinking, well, we're saved by grace, and we don't have to follow rules, and there's no law and all that stuff. And we forget that there are standards that we need to be living by. So Jesus is not saying, oh, yeah, tithing. Why would you don't tithe? No, he says you need to be tithing and paying attention to the bigger, overarching themes of the Christian faith. So this is a concept that is taken from the Old Testament and brought into the New as well, as a base for our giving to God. And then in 2 Corinthians 8, the Apostle Paul, remember, he's planting churches all around the Roman Empire. They're brand new churches. They don't have a lot of understanding. A lot of these are Gentile Christians, which means they don't have the Old Testament. They don't have the Jewish way of understanding, how a relationship with God looks and what they're supposed to do. So he gives them really practical advice. He'd go around and plant churches. Sometimes he'd make another lap and check on those churches. Sometimes as he was making a lap, churches were having problems. He'd write letters back to them, or he'd be in prison and write letters back to them. And on the issue of giving and tithing, he gets really practical and spiritual in 2 Corinthians 8. And here's what he says. He says, remember this, whoever sows sparingly will also reap sparingly. And whoever sows generously will also reap generously. So if you put just a few seeds in your garden, you're only going to have a few plants. They're going to have a few pieces of fruit or vegetables or whatever it is on them. But if you spread that out, the more that you put into the ground, the more that is going to make a harvest for you. Now, there may be some, well, if I put it in the ground, what if it doesn't grow? Or, I could be eating this. Or, you have different conversations about it. But the more you put in, the more you're going to get. And that's true on a practical level, but it's also true on a spiritual level as well. In verse 7, he says, each one of you, applying that principle, you should give what you have decided in your heart to give, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. And I would add to that, not because you've been guilt-tripped, not because it's like, okay, fine, you said I'm supposed to, I'm going to do it, and then you knock one of our offering boxes down because you slam your tithe check in there. That's not a cheerful giver. That's an angry giver. We don't want to be angry givers. We want to recognize, no, God's blessed me. What an honor I have to be a blessing to other people and to be disciplined in my giving, so that just as I grow in my relationship with God here, ministries can be expanded and more people could be brought into a relationship with God here as well. It's like I've been given, and so I'm going to give. I'm not just going to be a taker, I'm going to be a giver. And when you say I'm going to give, and I'm going to make it my goal to be a blessing to others, look at verse 8. And God, who is able to bless you abundantly, so that in all things and at all times, having all that you need, you will abound in every good work. So once again, God blesses us so that we can take what we have and be a blessing to others. That is true of your time. That is true of your energy. That is true of your talents and your abilities, your spiritual gifts. And it's true of your money as well. He gives to you, He gives to me, so that we can in turn be a blessing to other people. This is what it's supposed to look like within the context of ministry, and what it's supposed to look like within the context of church life and the godly life. And so we can see in Scripture that there is a challenge presented to Christians that we should be disciplined in our finances, to put God first and to give to Him off the top. What we often do whenever we give, though, is we take a look at our month and the bills that we've paid, and it's like, okay, I've paid these bills and I've had this money, so this is what I've got left, and this is what I'm going to give to God. That is the opposite of the mindset and the way of practicing the tithe. The challenge is you give God off of the top, and you may need to make sacrifices along the way to make ends meet. But you do that, and if you're disciplined in that, you put God first in your finances, I think that that generosity comes back to bless you, both in very practical and spiritual ways as well. I'm not one of those guys who stands on, TV and says, hey, if you sow a seed, if you give $1,000 to our church, God's going to give you $10,000. I think that's ridiculous and it's manipulative, and I don't play those games. But I do think that this principle does apply to the life of every single Christian. And if you put God first in your finances, things tend to play out in your financial situation better as a result. And the more that you're blessed, then the more that you turn and continue to work harder at being a bigger blessing to others. Now, what I've found to be the case as well when it comes to giving to the church, it's not a matter of we don't agree with the idea. It's like, number one, people haven't been taught, so maybe you don't think of it as 10% in terms of your gift to the church. But then in addition to that, it's like, okay, let's say you became a Christian later in life, or things have gotten tight or whatever, and you're looking at your bills, you're looking at your month of income, and you're like, how do I give 10%? What does that look like? How does that play out? How am I supposed to do that? And part of the issue is on a practical level, people are not good at managing their personal finances. We don't have a budget where you sit down and it's like, okay, this is how much money I make, and this is how much I'm going to spend on gasoline for my car. And this is how much we're going to spend on Ameren or Illinois Power, whatever it is. And this is how much we're going to spend on our water bill. Like every month, you've got to have a budget that you stick to. And it's the 23rd today. So we're on the back half of the month. And you may say, hey, let's go out to eat after church. Do you have money budgeted to go out to eat? Or have you blown through that we call it a fun budget. And my family's personal we call it our fun budget. By May 23rd, we do not have a fun budget left. Like, by May 5th, we probably didn't have a fun budget left. And so it's like, well, can we go out to eat? Can I go buy this? Well, you have to know the answer to that. And the solution to that is not, well, let me pull up our banking app and see if there's money in the account. In fact, just thinking of that causes me so much stress and anxiety to think that some people do not know where they're at. How much are you spending on gas? How much is your car paying? Like, what are you spending? I would not sleep. I'd be so stressed out, so freaked out. I'd have sleepless nights. And it's not because I'm obsessed with money. I probably am, just like every other average American is, to be honest with you. But I'm not overly obsessed. I just don't want somebody showing up saying, hey, you've not been making your house payment. You guys have 30 days to get out of here. Or that car that you've been driving, hey, you've not been making, you're going to take that away. Or your kids aren't going to get to eat. Because that's the kind of stuff that happens when we don't manage our finances the right way. Not only that, but just think about what you and your spouse, if you're married, think about what you fight about more than anything else. And I can almost promise you I know what that is. You know what it is? It's money. If you're like every average American family, so, the stat is that somewhere around 50% of marriages end in divorce. I think that's a little high, and I can explain why. It's not important to the illustration. So let's just say 50% of marriages end in divorce. 75% of those marriages say that money was like the leading cause of their fights and their troubles. It led to other things that were bigger problems, but it started with money. Well, if you have a budget, you don't have to fight about money unless the person goes outside the realm of the budget. Because when you don't have a budget and you're worried about how you're going to pay bills, and he comes walking through the door and he's just gone to Dunham's and he bought himself some arrows. You're like, what are you buying? Oh, I got to buy some arrows for my new bow. You bought a new bow? Well, yeah. When is hunting season? It's the summer. Well, it's in October, but I got to get dialed in. I got to get everything ready to go. You don't need to buy, we got to buy braces for the kids or whatever. Well, I put food on the table when I go hunting. No, you kill like 2 deer and then we buy the rest of that's not really putting food on the table. And then there's a fight. Rah, 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 rah. But what if you had that budgeted? Like, what if each spouse had $100 a month to go spend on whatever they wanted? And then he comes walking in the door with the same bag of arrows. What are those? Arrows. I went to Dunham's. I used part of my $100 budget to go, oh, those are cute arrows. Yes. They're green and everything. The deer won't see those arrows, honey. Those look great. Do they go fast and straight? Like that's a different conversation now. Or when your wife walks in with a box about this big, and it's a shoe box, and your closet has about 37,000 shoes, and you're like, are we about to give these away to some like country that needs shoes? And if you don't have it budgeted, there's a fight. Why do you need more shoes? I have too many shoes. You got to get rid of some of these shoes. Rah, 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 rah. We can't afford shoes. But if you're spending the money that's in the budget, well, look at those. I do like those shoes. Yes, they do match your purse and your outfit. I think that they're great. You remind me of Dorothy because they're red. You could just, there's no place like home. Honey, those are great shoes. I love them. It's a different conversation when it's been budgeted. And so there are different problems and issues that can be avoided if you just had a plan and then you stuck to the plan. And I think in every area of our lives, including this one, discipline equals freedom. People think a lot of times, if I'm disciplined, it's going to be harder and I won't have, like, I feel restricted and I'll feel burdened. No. You will feel freedom. Because you won't wake up in the middle of the night going, how are we going to pay that bill? It's due tomorrow. It's the third notice. What are we going to do about that? You're not going to have that problem if you have a budget and you stick to the budget. I think with diet, it's the same way. With time management, it's the same way. The more disciplined you are, the more freedom you will have, the better off you will be, both short and long term. So if you do not have a budget, you need to get a budget. And it's got to be something that's on paper that you and your spouse agree to. Don't you make the budget, then tell them what it's supposed to look like. I've got $200 for shoes every month. You've got $10 to go buy hunting gear. That's not fair, okay? So you got to do it together, and you got to figure out, and you're going to have to go back in time, so to speak, not like Marty McFly back in time, but you got to go through old bank statements, old credit card statements, because you're going to have, okay, gasoline. Here's our gasoline budget. What do we put? You don't just put a random number. You got to go back and say, okay, last month we spent this on a budget. The month before we spent this, and the month before. So here's what our gas budget's going to be. And on the list goes. In fact, on the back table where the baby bottles are, that you're supposed to be taking, filling with change, and bringing back, there are some budget sheets. And they're from Dave Ramsey. I got them from Dave Ramsey. They're free downloads. You can go to his website. He's got all kinds of free stuff that you can look at. The budget sheets look something like this. Okay? Actually, they look exactly like this, only your copies are black and white. I put the color on the screen. He says, okay, grocery budget. How much do you spend on groceries? Do you have an idea of what that number is? Or do you just go to the store and say, well, I'm going to buy whatever I want to buy? Or do you say, we're going to buy this amount of groceries and we're going to try to stay within that? Maybe we're going to go to Aldi this month or this week because we're kind of at the end of our grocery budget. And our kids, they've really got accustomed to eating. So we got to keep buying food. Can't really skimp on that. But maybe we can be strategic about what we buy and where we buy it. Clothing, when Shannon and I got married for like the first, 7 years, we didn't have a clothing budget. I wasn't growing, so it's like, okay, what I've got is good. And if we got money for Christmas or whatever, she would use it to buy clothes. We didn't have a clothing budget. And like that wasn't something we bought. You got your tithes and your saving. You got to be saving. I'll talk about that in just a moment. And then you got housing stuff. You got transportation stuff. You've got utilities. How much are you spending on your cell phone? And you start to look at this stuff, and you start budgeting it. You're like, we spend this much on our phones? Dude, I'm going to go Cricket or one of those other services. I'm going to try to figure this out because, like, you start to actually look. How much are we paying for cable? How much are we paying for DirecTV? We have Netflix, Hulu, Disney Plus, fill in the blank for some other service. I can't think of it off the top of my head. We pay this much for all it. How much TV are we actually watching? We're never home. We have 37,000 sporting events a month. Why do we have such a souped-up TV package? That was our conversation. We cut DirecTV. We got rid of it. So you have to go through, and you got to figure all that stuff out. And then you can kind of start to get some breathing room a little bit. And you can leave a little bit of margin in your budget so that when a curveball comes, and if you've lived on planet Earth long enough, you know that a financial curveball is coming. A hot water heater is going to go out. Your car is going to stop running. Something's going to happen to you. Where is that money going to come from to fix it? You have got to have an answer other than, Visa. It's everywhere you want to be, or whatever the slogan is. And you're just going to charge it and make payments on it for the next 35 years. at minimum payments and maximum interest. So you've got to figure that out. And on the back table, this is just like the beginning of the process. And once you start to write in everything, it's going to take a couple or 3 months to get stuff dialed in. And you're going to have to make adjustments to your budget. And you're going to have to try to figure out, is this going to work for us? Is this going to be long term? One of the things that we do to help keep track of our budget is on our phones, our being my wife and I, we have an app that Dave Ramsey came up with called Every Dollar. So you can put your budget in the app, and whenever you make a purchase, if you get gas, you just type it in right away. Make sure you clean your hands before you touch your phone, because you just touched the gas tank, and that stuff's gross. There's a lot of germs on that. So you sanitize, then you enter the receipt in, and in real time, my wife knows what our gas budget is. Except for the fact that I have like 30 receipts in my car at any given moment, and after she goes through my car, yells at me because she finds the 30 receipts, puts them in, then we know in real time where we're at exactly. So then you keep track of all of that, and you have a good idea of where you're at from week to week and month to month. And what we do is every month we go through and we figure it out. Okay, we were over by this much, or we were under by this much, and you can't keep going under every month. You have got to make adjustments to your spending if you're having that problem. But as you kind of do that and you get into a groove, then you're not like, oh man, I got to go to Tractor Supply to buy whatever. No, there's a budget for that. The other thing that Ramsey recommends, which I never do, is you pay cash. Pay cash for everything. What I mean by pay cash, like you go to Tractor Supply, you have an envelope that's marked homestead budget. That's what it's called in my personal budget, homestead, and you buy the dog food and whatever it is with cash. I just don't like to ever carry cash. That's why I use the app on my phone. He says you spend less when you pay in cash. I think that's true for the most part, but like when I get gas, I don't like fill up somebody else's tank. Hey, I'm using a card today. Sir, would you like some gas? You get some gas and you get some gas. Like it doesn't work. Like I just spend what I spend. But there are different things you can do to trick your brain into feeling what it's like that you're spending that money. And you may make less drive-through trips to McDonald's or Culver's or wherever it is you go when you have an understanding, wait a minute. We agreed that this is our weekly eat-out budget or monthly or whatever, and I'm going to eat out once every week or once every other week during my lunch break, and I'm going to PB&J it up or take a tuna fish sandwich every other day that I go to work. Tuna fish is a good choice, packed with protein. It's really cheap, like 65 cents at Aldi. That's my jam. It is gross, but it's really healthy. Well, you may have to do stuff like that. And while you're eating that tuna fish sandwich, which tastes gross, you're going to be like, that's freedom, baby. That's freedom. You're going to feel good about things. So you have got to figure out what that looks for you and what that looks like in your family, but you have got to have a budget. You either get a budget or you're going to get an ulcer. And those are basically your two options. Now, something else that Ramsey does is he has the 7 baby steps. I'm going to go through these quickly. The big thing I want you to see is, and get a budget is not even a baby step. It's like the pre-baby step, okay? So you got your budget. The first thing he says you got to do is you got to save $1,000. Something's going to happen in your life, water heater, transmission, something's going to go out. You've got to have $1,000 in the bank or tucked away in your gun safe, something, so that when something goes bad, you can pay for it and you're not like, oh no, this went. Repairs and problems cause a lot more stress when you don't know how you're going to pay for them. Inconvenience is bad enough. When you're wondering how you're going to pay, that's even worse. So he says, like, you need to aggressively get $1,000. You need to sell stuff. You need to get rid of stuff. You need to cut stuff. You need to get $1,000 as quick as you can. You need to get your kids on mission with you. Go through stuff. You have a garage sale, whatever it is. Make them think that you're so passionate about getting that $1,000 that, like, anything's on the table. Like, we're going to sell Fido? We'll sell Fido if we don't get the $1,000 quick enough. Come on, we got to get this thing going. So you're getting that $1,000 as quick as you can. If you're on a limited income or whatever, that changes to $500 according to his stuff. But you got to get it quickly. The debt snowball we're going to talk about and unpack next week. Then after you get all your debt taken care of, not including your house payment, but all your debt taken care of, you need to get 3 to 6 months of your income in the bank, because if 2020 taught us anything, it's that our financial stability is always in question, and you've got to have something to fall back on if things go bad very quickly. Once you've got 3 to 6 months of your income there, you invest 15% of your income to your retirement fund, so you don't have to work when you're 80 years old. You invest for college after that, make your kids pay for college before you do, pay off your house, and then after you get rid of all your debt, then you're just looking at the opportunity to give everything away. Now this, you may say, well, I disagree. I would change the order of some of that. That's fine, as long as you have a plan and work the plan. This isn't thus saith the Lord. This is thus saith Dave Ramsey. He could be wrong. Probably been wrong multiple times in his life, as you and I have. And so I'm not saying this is what you have to do. I'm saying if you've not thought about this and you have no steps and you're just kind of floating in the ocean with no motor, so to speak, you got to come up with some type of plan. And you then have to work the plan and evaluate the plan and adjust the plan. So this is one of the options. And I will say this about Financial Peace University. That's kind of his 9-week course. We did a lot of those at my last church. I was over all of adult ministry, so that was under my area of oversight. And the average is, during the 9-week class, the participants would have a $9,000 change of direction in their finances. In the plus, by the way, not in the minus. That'd be bad. A $9,000 plus turnaround because they got really serious and focused. And you're like, where do people just come up with $9,000 in the course of 9 weeks? How does that happen? For most of them, I'd say the vast majority of them, they had 2 car payments. They were both like $300 to $400 each. They got rid of a car payment. Honey, we're going to keep your car. We're going to keep your car payment. But I'm getting rid of my truck or my car, whatever it is. I'm going to drive something that is not as nice. It's not as new. Maybe a little bit less reliable, but that's okay. Like for me, I can outrun 100% of people that would try to mug me. Okay, I'm okay. My wife cannot outrun that many people. We raced. We determined I'm faster, so I will drive the car that may be more likely to break down. So that's what the people do. And whenever they sell that car, and they maybe take that money that they got from it, maybe it's $5,000, they go buy a $5,000 car. A little Honda Civic or something, and as they're driving around in that tiny little car with 4 cylinders, and you know what they hear? Freedom. Because they're not stressed out about their finances. And so whenever you think about your picture and what it looks like, I don't know what the plan has to be for you, but you have to have a plan. Financial peace. Our average as a church was like $10,000 change of direction. We beat the national average. When I first saw the numbers, I'm like, what? And then when our church people did it, they got focused and dialed in, and they figured out that discipline equals freedom in that area as well. So, here's my challenge to you. If you don't have a budget, you have got to figure that out and get yourself a budget. Those budget forms are in the back of the room. If we run out, you can talk to me. I'll give you the website. There's a plethora of things that you can look at. And then, for your sake, and for the condition of your heart and your relationship with God, you need to move towards a biblical tithe. Now, if you're giving 0% right now, don't think you're going to make that up by next week. Well, we don't give anything, but we're going to give 10% starting next week. Now, if you can, then do that. But just like anything in life, there's progress that has to be made. Maybe you cut a couple of your expenses out. Maybe you cancel a couple of your subscriptions and you go from 0% to 2%. Or you go from, well, we just give $25 a week because it's just a number and, hey, that's what we give. Maybe you say, okay, we're not going to give 25. We're going to do our best to kind of stretch that. And we're going to go from a little bit to 5%. But just make progress in this area in your life, just as we're trying to make progress in every area of your life. And when you make those cuts, and you do without in certain, in certain areas of your life, what you will find is you did not miss what you did not have. And so you may have to kind of get focused so that you stop obsessing about advertisements and things you see on TV and the commercials to where it's like, well, my truck doesn't do that, or look at that boat. You got to get focused in and say, Jesus, I'm going to put you first in my finances. I pray that you bless them. I pray that you help me in the condition of my heart so I keep making progress in this area. And as you do, and as you get to that 10% and beyond, you're going to find out that there is no better place to invest your money than in the kingdom of God. I believe that with all of my heart. I don't just say that because, well, this is what we're supposed to say, this is what we're supposed to do. And there are things that I've not had or not done without. It's like, well, if I took my tithe, I could go buy this. That's never been a real thought or consideration in my life. And I don't just do it because it's the right thing to do, or it's because of what I'm supposed to do, or like, hey, I preach tithing, so I've got to make sure I tithe. I do think there's truth in that. But I do it because it's what is best with my money. And when we get to spend eternity in God's presence, whatever toy you purchased, whatever thing that had a grip of your heart, all that stuff just goes away. It's not going to last for eternity. It's going to rust. It's going to get burned. It's just not going to last. But when you invest into the kingdom, it literally echoes throughout eternity. So think about where you spend your money. Think about the condition of your heart, both on a spiritual and practical level as well, and make progress in this area.